Hey watch fam, thanks for clicking on the video and welcome to the channel. Today I want to share my experience with the JAEGER LECOULTRE Polaris Chronograph in blue after owning it for just a little bit over 4 years. Before we get started with the video, let's do a quick wrist check. I am wearing my SUF Helsinki 180 with the salmon dial on this really cool green ostrich skin strap that I really enjoy. That looks fantastic, and I also reviewed that video down here below. I will try to remember and drop a link to that if you would like to check it out, as this is a pretty sweet watch. So in the early days of the channel, I did a video about this watch. I had just got some new equipment and I was really just starting to get used to that. So my son said that I can officially call myself a low-grade YouTuber, which is a significant upgrade over old guy that does YouTube videos. So yay me. So I definitely have made some progress, and hopefully you enjoy this video and me sharing my experience with this incredible watch. Apologies to any die-hard JAEGER LECOULTRE fans out there, but for the remainder of this video, I am going to say JOC to avoid the 230 edits that would surely ensue from me trying to say that correctly each time. And trust me, if you don't like the way I say JAEGER LECOULTRE, wait until you hear me pronounce some of the other brands. I've owned the JOC Polaris Chronograph in blue for just over 4 years, and it is definitely a very special watch. It makes the case of probably being my favorite watch, given that this was the first JOC that I was able to add to the collection. And while I love this watch, this doesn't mean that it's without its flaws, and I will try to cover those as honestly as I can. So for starters, this is a significant purchase for me for many reasons. One, it was the first time that I was able to purchase a watch directly from an authorized dealer, and that was something that was really special. Secondly, if you guys don't mind, I'm gonna drink this. This was my first JLC, and it was the first one that actually spoke to me. I was familiar with the brand. I had seen them in some watch catalogs, and reading on the forums, I knew that they were a ultra luxury watchmaker, a watch brand that had just tremendous brand history. When I first saw the campaign, I could tell you I was obsessed with this watch. I probably watched the original campaign video well over 200 times, so you're welcome, JLC. But definitely a video that really spoke to me, and I initially at that point became obsessed with the watch. This was the watch that really kind of dethroned IWC as my favorite watch brand. Up until that point, IWC was probably the brand that spoke to me the most. And when I started to really get into JLC's catalog and some of their backstory, their future watch design really spoke to me, and which allowed me to open up and go back a little bit further as I thought about how I wanted to continue to build my collection. And if you're not a frequent visitor to the channel, you should stop what you're doing and hit that subscribe button, even if it's to roast me for the way I say JAEGER LECOULTRE. Would always appreciate any feedback or comments. Lastly, this is just a badass watch. I strongly feel that this is the best blue dial watch in the watch game right now, and that is my biased opinion, so you cannot tell me that I am wrong. All right, so let's dive into my experience after 4 years of owning the JLC Polaris, and we're going to start off with the bad, particularly since that the opening 3 to 4 minutes of this video was practically a love fest about how much I love this watch. So first, the size of the movement was a point of contention when this watch was first released. This seems silly to me. However, you do notice when you flip the watch over that this movement does not fill the entirety of the case. However, this never really bothered me, as the movement still packs 65 hours of power reserve for a chronograph, and at the time that was the most power reserve that I had in any chronograph watch that I owned, so this was a pretty significant upgrade for me. I want to say that this was probably due, as this movement, the 751E, was initially used in the JAEGER LECOULTRE Amavox that was released, I want to say, back in 2005. So another thing that JLC did that was a little bit of a turnoff, and a lot of watch brands, especially the big watch brands, like to do this, is that they decided to put AR coating on both sides of the sapphire crystal. And while this does look amazing and create some really fantastic photos, it can be a little bit nightmarish for an OCD watch collector. Thankfully for me, I am not an OCD watch collector, so I don't mind my watches looking like they've been worn. But as you can see on mine, I'm going to try to capture it. There are a couple marks where the AR crystal has been removed. I do not have any safe queens in my collection. However, with that being said, I do wear this watch quite often. I would not have expected the AR coating to come off that easily. I'm usually pretty careful and make sure that I don't bump things around. I plan to keep this watch in my collection. So with that said, I would prefer to keep it all original and really enjoy and appreciate any nicks or scratches that I pick up as I own the watch. So I made the decision to purchase this watch after seeing the color and beauty of the dial. The three finishes is just extremely amazing. However, one of the things that was really off-putting was that this watch has no running seconds. So it is a bi-compact chronograph where you have the 12-hour counter and the 30-minute counter. And if you want to have a running seconds, you're going to leave the chronograph running. With that said, this is JLC, the watchmaker or the Grand Mason. And so this is equipped with a column wheel. So this is a column wheel chronograph, which means that you can run the chronograph seconds with no additional wear on your watch. This might be off-putting for a lot of buyers. However, I think that shortcoming for me is what makes this watch a 9.8 and not a 10 out of 10. But again, this watch is really, really incredible and it's something that I can overlook as I have a lot of devices around me that can give me real seconds in a moment. Lastly, this watch has 21 millimeter lugs. I love the modern broad stance that 21 millimeter lugs do for a design perspective. However, finding strap options can be a little bit of a challenge. JLC does make up for that by having an easily interchangeable buckle. I don't know if I'm one of the few watch collectors that like this, but I do think that it's really important for me if I'm changing straps. I try to always make sure that the OEM buckle is attached to whatever whatever third-party strap I decide to put on a watch. With that said, the JLC looks great on all three of the strap options that you can get on the Polaris line. Over the last 4 years, I have been able to source them all. I actually thought it was going to be really easy to find a metal bracelet one day down the line and save a few pennies if I can find one used on Chrono24 or the forums. I was dreadfully wrong in that case. So I recently, when my wife and I went to St. Thomas to celebrate our 21st anniversary, we walked into the Little Switzerland AD in the Ritz-Carlton there, and they were able to source it for me. It took a few months, but at least I was able to save some coin on the taxes. So thank you to the team down there. I also found the rubber strap that comes on the Polaris date. And again, I think this watch looks incredible on the rubber strap, the bracelet, and the brown leather strap. All right, so on to why this watch is in my collection and not going anywhere anytime soon. First, the proportions of the Polaris chronograph is just pure perfection. The Polaris chronograph is 11.9 millimeters thick, and it features, I want to say, just under 48 millimeters lug to lug. I have a 7.25 wrist, and this watch hugs my wrist perfectly and sits really comfortable, whether it's on the rubber strap or the bracelet. I really love the way this watch wears and presents on the wrist. So if you're not a watch nerd, you'll know that anything under 13 millimeters for a chronograph is extremely impressive. This is primarily based on the fact that a lot of major brands that don't have in-house chronograph movements uses the 7750 Valjoux, which can be a little bit thick, or a couple other, Valjoux-based clones. So JLC getting us a chronograph at 11.9 millimeters thick allows this to pretty much slide under any dress cuff except the extreme tightest of cuffs. The other thing to note about this case size of this watch is that this chronograph is extremely quiet. If you've worn a lot of 7750 based chronographs in the past, or even some other larger chronographs, there's usually quite a substantial wobble as you're moving your wrists around. I have never experienced that with this JLC. If you happen to hear it winding, it is really, really crisp and smooth. And a big fact with this, and something that was a big turn on for me, is that just like with all JLC watches, you're getting something that's 100% in-house. So that can be said from brands like Omega, Rolex, and of course JLC, being the Grand Mason, have made watch parts for so many different companies, different watch movement, and I want to say lead the watch industry in the number of patents and complications developed. This watch is highly wearable, and the downward turn lugs allow this to accommodate a variety of different size wrists. Even though this is a 42mm case, the 48mm lug deluxe on the Polaris allows this watch to just look really amazing. So even if you have smaller wrists and you want a chronograph to have a little bit more of a wrist presence, definitely try this on. It will fit and wear better than you think. It has the wrist presence of a watch that's a 42mm because of the presence of the dial, but because of this case construction, it probably wears about like a 41 and we're really close to the Omega Seamaster 300 Heritage. I will tell you the other thing I love about this watch is that the case finishing is a marvel to look at. JLC really knocked it out the park with just the level of detail they put into the casework. As you can see, mine has been frequently worn and I do have some marks on the horizontal and vertical brush parts, but JLC did a fantastic job by giving us these high polish on these. I don't know how to explain it, but there's so much detail, but there's a high polish on these lug flanks, and this combination of vertical and horizontal brushing really allowed this case to stand out. And when you flip it over and you get the bright contrast of the blue dial, this is really something special to look at. This is probably going to be worn on the bracelet for a really long time. This bracelet does really complement this case and was worth the long wait to complete the strap collection for the Polaris. I'm a sucker for pump pusher chronographs, but I do love the fact that JLC gave us something a little bit different here. The Polaris has boxier case construction, so I love the fact that JLC decided to go with rectangular pushers here and gave us something a little bit interesting by having these rectangular engraved pushers that look pretty awesome. And on the crown, we get the JLC logo that I think also is very well executed. So next up on the list, and I would say probably the main reason that I got this watch, I think I've rested it now at least 3 to 4 times, and that is this blue dial under this dome sapphire crystal. Just looks amazing. It is truly breathtaking. I was to own a watch in multiple colors. Getting this in black would be high on my priority list. With that said, there are just too many watches to own and not enough money, at least in my bank account, to get them all. So I'm going to continue to shop around and to get to experience different watches. JLC could have made the decision like they did with the blue Polaris date and use faux Tina, and I think it would have looked equally as awesome. Actually, that would be very interesting to see. I am actually excited if I am going to keep this in the collection long enough to see this patina, and I think that's going to look really incredible. With that said, I do enjoy the fact that they started off with these bright white luminescent hour markers and numerals that I think look incredible. I love the choice to go with just a 12 and 6 to avoid cutting off any numbers, and you get a really clean, balanced, and symmetrical dial. The dial is just perfectly balanced, and JLC made the watch collector's dream choice to not go with a date. With that said, I do know quite a few collectors that the date or no date argument will definitely sway their decision. For me, you can never go wrong with no date. I think having a purely beautiful balanced dial is just always a home run, and I definitely appreciate that decision here on the Polaris. So JLC has increased the price of the Polaris chronograph over the last 4 years, but when I look around the market, the Polaris does wear like a premium luxury timepiece. This is definitely less recognizable than a Daytona, which is something that I personally enjoy. I enjoy being able to wear this around and people just appreciate the beauty of the blue dial versus seeing that it's a Rolex Daytona. But the Polaris has remarkable wrist presence and wears incredibly well, and it's always a great conversation piece with the fellow watch collector. Lastly, the Polaris for me stands out on its own, and this was a major reason why I decided to add this watch to the collection. It has hints of vintage while not being vintage inspired, and it takes a massive leap in a modern direction from its predecessor, especially when you compare it to the 1968 tribute to Polaris that was a direct homage to the 1968 and was released in 2008. Everything from the case profile to the beveling of the lugs is just pure class on this Polaris chronograph, and is really just an incredible timepiece. Pure class. So with that said, as always, thank you for clicking on my video, and if you've gotten this far, thank you for hanging out and listening to my experience with this JLC Polaris, one of my favorite watches. I think it just really wears incredible. If you like this video, please drop a like and a comment below. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. It is definitely helping out. I am at 750 subscribers, so pretty excited about that. And just, you know, a quarter of a way from reaching that first milestone of 1,000. So as always, if you have not checked out my Instagram page by the same name, JAEGER Studios, feel free to also follow me there. Thanks again, and I will see you all soon.